श्री परमात्मने नमः। नारायणं नमस्कृते नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। श्रीमद् भगवद गीता साधक संजीवनी 4th chapter Transcendental Knowledge verses 33 to 42. Glory of the disciplines of knowledge and action and inspiration to follow them. Having heard the description of sacrifices, a striver has a curiosity to know which one of the sacrifices is superior to the others. The Lord answers the question in the next verse. Verse 33. Shriyan dravyamyad yagyaj jnana yagyaha parantapa sarvam karma khelam partha jnane parismapyate. Knowledge as a sacrifice is superior to any material sacrifice, O harasser of the foes. All actions in their entirety, O Arjuna, culminate in knowledge. Comment. The sacrifices which require material objects and actions are called Dravemaya. The Lord declares that all sacrifices are born of action. But here he declares that all actions culminate in knowledge. That is, knowledge as a sacrifice is not born of actions but is born of discrimination. So long as a man performs actions for himself, he has affinity for them and consequently his mind remains impure. But when he does not perform them for himself, his mind is purified. The mind is tainted by 3 kinds of defects: sins, volatility of mind, and ignorance. When a striver performs actions for the welfare of others without any selfish motive, his first 2 defects, that is, sins and volatility of mind, come to an end. Then, in order to get rid of the 3rd defect, having renounced actions, he goes to his preceptor so that the preceptor may impart knowledge to him. At that time, he does not aim at actions and material objects, but his aim is God realization. This is known as culmination of all actions and material objects in knowledge, that is, God realization through the attainment of true knowledge. The common method to attain knowledge. In the scriptures, there are 8 inward spiritual means to attain knowledge. They are discrimination, dispassion, 6 traits, that is, quietism, self-control, piety, resignation, endurance, and composure. Desire to attain salvation, hearing of Vedantic texts, cognition, constant and profound meditation, self-realization. Discrimination, that is Viveka, consists in distinguishing the real from the unreal. Renunciation of the unreal or having a disinclination for the world is called dispassion, Vairagya. Deviation of the mind from the senses is quietism, Sama. Control over the senses is Dhamma. Reverence for God and the scriptures is called piety, Shraddha. Total resignation from the world is Upparati. Forbearance in the pairs of opposites such as heat and cold is endurance, Titiksha. Freedom from doubts is composure, Samadhana. The desire for salvation is called Mumukshta. When desire for salvation is aroused, a striver having renounced material objects and actions goes to the learned God-realized preceptor. He hears the Vedantic text which removes his doubts. Then he thinks of the reality about God which is known, cognition, manana. If he holds that the world is real and God does not exist, this is the opposite conception. Removal of this contrary conception is called constant and profound meditation, Nididhyasana. When he, having renounced affinity for all the material objects, gets established in the self, it is called self-realization, Tattvam Padartha Sanshodhana. In fact, all these spiritual disciplines are practiced in order to renounce the affinity for the unreal, the thing which is renounced is not for one's own self, but the result of renunciation, that is, God realization, is for one's own self. Now, Lord explains how to attain self-realization through the knowledge as sacrifice. Verse 34. Tad vidhi pranipatena परिप्रश्नेन सेवया उपदेक्ष्यन्ति ते ज्ञानं ज्ञानेन तत्त्वदर्शिनः. Learn that by prostration, by question, and by service, the wise who have realized the truth will instruct thee in that knowledge. Comment. It seems that the Lord warns Arjuna that if he, because of his lack of faith in him, does not believe in what he preaches, he should go to the wise preceptor who has realized the truth, and he will impart him the knowledge of self-realization through the traditional practice of knowledge. He should go to the teacher with profound humility and perfect devotion, and through prostration surrender himself, his body and possessions, etc. to him. A striver renders the greater service to the saints, that is, great souls, by translating their principles into practice, because their principles are more loving to them than even their bodies. They remain prepared to sacrifice their life in order to protect their principles. A striver should ask questions to his preceptor with inquisitiveness, simplicity, and humility in order to know the reality about God, rather than to display his own learning or to put his preceptor to a test. He should put such question: Who am I? What is the world? What is the cause of bondage? What is salvation? How can I realize God? What are the obstacles to my spiritual practice? How to do away with these obstacles? Why am I unable to understand this topic of God realization? Thus, he should satisfy his curiosity and gain knowledge from his preceptor. According to the purification of the mind, there are three kinds of strivers who are qualified to gain that knowledge: the superior, the mediocre, and the inferior. The superior ones are those who attain the knowledge of the real merely by hearing the Vedantic text. The mediocre ones attain this knowledge by hearing, cognition, and constant and profound meditation. The inferior ones have several doubts. In order to clarify those doubts, it is necessary to possess knowledge of the Vedas and the scriptures. Without possessing knowledge, even the preceptor who has realized the truth can't clarify the doubts of his disciples. Similarly, even a learned preceptor who has not realized the truth can't conduce his disciple to self-realization. Therefore, the preceptor should be one who is wise and who has also realized the truth. In the next three verses, the Lord explains the real merit or glory of self-realization. Verse 35. याज ज्ञात्वा न पुनर्मोहम् एवं यास्यसि पाण्डवा येन भूतानि यशेषाणि द्रक्ष्यासि आत्मन्यात्थो मयि. When thou hast known it, thou shalt not, O Arjuna, again get deluded like this, and by that thou shalt see all beings without exception in the self and then in me. Comment. A striver, having gained knowledge of the self by hearing, cognition, constant and profound meditation, etc., from the preceptor, sees all beings in the self. This is the realization of Tvam, self-realization, and then he sees all beings and the self in God. This is realization of Tat, God realization. Thus, he realizes the identity of the self with God, and then nothing remains for him except God. The trio of the seer, the sight, and the seen gets extinct. When this trio gets extinct, there remains no perceiver. Therefore, the expression he perceives refers to the feeling prevailing in the inner sense of that perfect soul. The sea and its waves may seem different, but both of them are one and the same. Both of them are nothing but water. The sea and the waves are limited, while the element water is unlimited. Therefore, he who sees water in both the sea and the waves really sees. As are the sea and its waves, so are the world and the body. As waves appear and disappear in the sea, so are bodies born and they perish in the world. But both of them have no independent existence of their own. Only God has independent existence. In God, there is neither world nor body. They seem to exist because of the existence of God. Both of them, because of their affinity for nature, are limited, while God is limitless. He who, instead of seeing the world and bodies, sees the Supreme Lord existing equally in all beings, really sees. Verse 36. Api chedasi papebhyah sarvebhyah papakritmah sarvam jnana palvena eva brijinam santarishyasi. Even if thou art the most sinful of all sinners, thou shalt undoubtedly cross all sins by the boat of knowledge alone. Comment. There are three categories of the sinful persons: the sinful, the more sinful, the most sinful. Even the most sinful person can attain salvation in this life, and even immediately if he resolves never to commit sin, but only to attain salvation or self-realization. The sins of such a person of firm resolve perish in no time. As darkness of hundreds of years disappears as soon as the lamp is lit, it doesn't take time, so do sins disappear as soon as knowledge of the self is gained. Verse 37. Yathai dhansi samithogner bhasma satkurute arjuna jnana agniha sarva karmani bhasma satkurute tatha. As the blazing fire reduces fuel to ashes, O Arjuna, even so does the fire of knowledge reduce all actions to ashes. Comment. In fact, all actions are performed by the modes of nature, but a man is bound by them when he thinks that he is the doer. As actions such as circulation of blood, growth of the body, breathing and digestion, etc., are performed by the modes of nature, so are eating, drinking, walking, sitting, seeing and speaking, etc., performed. But when he holds that he is the doer of those actions, they bind him. The sense of doership makes activities an action, otherwise, they are mere activities. By the knowledge of the self, the stock of the accumulated actions is totally destroyed, because all accumulated actions depend on ignorance. All the present actions are destroyed, that is, changed into inaction, because he has no sense of doership. They don't bear any fruit. As far as prarabdha actions, fate, are concerned, they produce favorable and unfavorable circumstances. But the man of knowledge is not in the least affected by them. He remains equanimous without feeling sad or happy. Thus, when he has no affinity for actions in the least, all his actions are reduced to ashes, that is, are changed into inaction. The Lord in the first half of the next verse reveals the glory of knowledge, while in the second half he glorifies karma yoga, the discipline of action. Verse 38. Nahi jnanena sadrisham pavitram iha vidyate tat swayam yoga sansiddha kalinatmani vindati. Verily, there is no purifier in this world like knowledge. He who becomes perfected in yoga finds it in the self in course of time. Comment. Only human beings are qualified to gain purity. Such opportunities are not available in other species. All rights in other species are acquired through human body only. The belief in the independent existence of the world and the desire to derive pleasure out of it give birth to all sins. By the knowledge of the self, when the world ceases to have its independent existence, all sins are totally destroyed and a man becomes completely pure. Therefore, in the world there is no other means as capable of sanctifying as knowledge. The means, such as the performance of sacrifice, charity, penance, adoration, vows, fast, chanting the Lord's name, meditation, breath restraint, bath in sacred rivers such as the Ganges, the Yamuna, and the Godavari, destroy his sins and purify him. But none of them is as purifying as his knowledge of the self, because all of them are the means while knowledge is the end. God is the purest among the pure. The knowledge of the self being conducive to the realization of God, who is the purest, most sacred, is very pure. The Lord in the next verse explains who is eligible to attain that knowledge. Verse 39. श्रद्धावान् लभते ज्ञानं तत् परः संयत इन्द्रियाः ज्ञानं लब्ध्वा परां शान्तिम् अचिरेणाधिगच्छति. He who has faith, who is devoted to it, that is knowledge, and who has subdued his senses, gains knowledge, and having gained knowledge, he attains at once the supreme peace. Comment. In the verse, it is mentioned that the man who is full of faith gains knowledge. A man lacking faith may hold that he has faith. So the Lord has given two adjectives. Sayant Indriyaha, who has subdued the senses, and Tatparaha, devoted, as the criteria of faith. The striver who has subdued his senses can be called devoted to knowledge. If senses have not been subdued and they hanker after sensual pleasures, it means that the striver is not fully devoted to the knowledge of the self. The belief in God, saints, righteousness, and the scriptures is called Shraddha, faith. So long as a striver does not realize God, he should have as much faith in him as he has when he has seen something himself. God pervades everywhere, but he is not realized because he holds that he is far away from him. When he holds that he is in him and his only aim is to realize him, he gains the knowledge of the self or God. The world, being kaleidoscopic, has no existence of its own, but it seems to exist because of the existence, that is, light of God. When a striver has this faith, he gains knowledge of the self immediately. It is only because of his lack of faith that he does not gain this knowledge immediately. So long as senses are not subdued and the striver is not engrossed in his efforts, his faith may be regarded as imperfect. If the senses are attracted towards their objects, there cannot be any concentration of efforts that results in the dominance of something other than the practice. Unless there is devotion to exclusive practice, the faith cannot mature. Because of immature faith only, the realization of the essence, that is self, is delayed. Otherwise, there is not at all any cause of delay in realizing the self that is ever available. In the next verse, the Lord speaks ill of the person who lacks discrimination, who has no faith, and who is of a doubtful disposition. Verse 40. Agyascha shraddadhanascha संस्यात्मा विनश्यति नायं लोको अस्ति न परो न सुखम संस्यात्मनः. The man who is devoid of discriminative insight, who has no faith, who is of a doubting nature, perishes. For the doubting soul, there is neither this world nor the world beyond, nor any happiness. Comment. The man whose discrimination is not aroused, or the man whose discrimination is aroused, but he does not attach importance to it, such a man of a doubting nature perishes, that is deprived of the spiritual path. Such a person of the doubting nature uses neither his own discrimination nor listens to the teachings of others. So how can his doubts be removed and how can he progress spiritually? It is natural for a striver who follows the spiritual path to be confronted with doubts because his knowledge is imperfect, which is known as ignorance. Therefore, the appearance of doubt is natural and it is not very harmful. But it proves harmful when a person does not make effort to remove it, but he rather wants to maintain it. In such cases, the doubt becomes a principle for the person and he holds that the spiritual practice is nothing but hypocrisy. So he ceases to believe in God and the scriptures, etc., and becomes an atheist. Consequently, it leads to his downfall. Therefore, a striver should try to remove his doubt. By doing so, he will gain knowledge. It is characteristic of a striver to investigate and discover an important fact. In the practical life, a man of doubting nature behaves badly towards others because he doubts their integrity and actions, etc. He also can't attain salvation because it requires a determinate intellect or firm resolution, and the man of doubting nature can't resolve whether he should chant the Lord's name or study the scriptures, whether he should perform the mundane actions or attain God realization, and so on. Because of his doubting nature, he can't attain happiness or peace. Therefore, a striver through discrimination and faith must get rid of this doubt. When a striver comes across two contradictory statements, it leads to skepticism. Such skepticism can be removed either by discrimination or through the reverential study of the scriptures or by reverentially following the advice of saints and holy men. Thus, if a skeptic is lacking in knowledge, he should acquire knowledge and wisdom. If he is wanting in faith, he should endeavor to gain faith. It is because without especially enhancing either of these two, his skepticism can't be removed. Now the question arises, what a karma yogi should do in order to attain perfection in yoga. The Lord answers the question in the next verse. Verse 41. Yoga sanyasta karmanam jnana sanchina sansham atmavantam na karmani nibadhananti dhananjaya. He who has renounced all actions by yoga, whose doubts have been destroyed by knowledge, and who is self-possessed, actions do not bind him. O winner of wealth, comment. All the objects such as the body, the senses, the mind, and the intellect, etc., which seem ours, have been bestowed upon us so that we may render service to others with them, rather than to lay claim to them. Therefore, if they are utilized in rendering service to others by considering them theirs, the flow of actions and objects is towards the world, and we realize equanimity, which is axiomatic. Thus, such a karma yogi who through equanimity has renounced his affinity for actions is called yoga sannyasta karma, one who has renounced actions by yoga. When a karma yogi sees inaction in action and action in inaction, that is, ever remains detached during performance or non-performance of actions, he is really yoga sannyasta karma. Generally, a man has doubts how he will be able to renounce his affinity for actions while performing them, how he will attain salvation if he does not work for himself, and so on. But when he knows the reality about actions, all his doubts are dispelled. He comes to know very well that actions and their fruits are transitory, while the self ever remains uniform. Therefore, actions have their affinity for the world rather than for the self. In this way, when actions are performed with a selfish motive, a man is attached to them, that is, develops affinity for them. But when they are performed for others without any selfish motive, affinity for them is renounced. It proves that performance of actions for others, not for one's own self, leads to salvation. In fact, it is not actions which lead to bondage, but it is desire for fruit, sense of mind, attachment, and the sense of doership for actions which lead to bondage. Now, in the next verse, the Lord orders Arjuna to resort to yoga, having cut as under the doubt. Verse 42. Tasmad ajnana sambhutam harittham jnanasinatmanaha chitvenam sansyam yogam atishthotishthha bharta. Therefore, having cut as under with the sword of knowledge this doubt in thy heart that is born of ignorance, resort to yoga and stand up for the fight. O Bharata, comment. In the preceding verse, the Lord declared, he who has renounced affinity for all actions by yoga, equanimity, and whose doubts have been dispelled by knowledge and who is self-possessed, actions do not bind him. That is, he is liberated from the bondage of birth and death. Therefore, he by using the term tasmat, that is therefore, inspires Arjuna to perform his duty. Arjuna had a doubt how the savage deed of fighting would lead him to salvation. Moreover, he was in a dilemma whether he should follow the discipline of action or that of knowledge. So the Lord advises him to remove his doubt so that he may perform his duty scrupulously. A doubting soul can never perform his duty efficiently. In the world, innumerable actions are performed, but we remain free from their bondage because we have neither attachment nor aversion to them. It is because of attachment or aversion that we are connected with actions. When we become free from attachment and aversion, that is, get established in equanimity, we are not connected with actions and thus become free from the bondage of actions. The self ever remains equanimous and uniform while actions and their fruits ever undergo changes. When actions are performed for others and objects are regarded as others and for them, the affinity for actions and objects is totally renounced, and equanimity, which is axiomatic, is automatically realized. Om Tat Sat. All glories to Parthasarthi Lord Shri Krishna. All glories to Bhagavad Vani Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Shri Hari Arpanamastu.